Welcome back, everybody, to the ROI Online Podcast. And today we're going to learn something that is opposite of what we've been told all of our lives, that crime doesn't pay. But our guest today actually proves that crime does pay. Actually, writing about crime and mysteries pays. Please welcome Kristina Stanley.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm so excited and proud that you're here. So Kristina has a company called Fictionary.co. It's a creative editing software for fiction writers and editors. And in particular, it talks about or helps you nail 38 fictionary story elements that helps your book become way more impactful. Also, Kristina happens to be an author of a lot of books. She's the author of the Stone Mountain Mystery Series. And so, Kristina, I'm excited. Tell us a little bit about how in the world does someone start writing crime mystery novels or series? That's fascinating.
Okay, so first of all, I love reading mysteries. So, write what you love. So
Right?
that's part of it. And I was the director at a ski resort, and I ran the security team and the guest services team and the human resources team. And so that meant I had responsibility for all of the people things that happened at the resort.
Mm-hmm.
And I left that job and I went sailing with my husband down to the Caribbean. And while I was there, I discovered that one, I really missed the ski resort. And two, I needed something mentally stimulating to do besides sail around, which is lovely, but you still need something, in your brain. And so I just decided one day, I'm going to write a novel. I had no idea how hard it was going to be. The decision to go with mysteries was easy because that's what I read and I love them. So I really wanted to write a mystery.
So it's like, I understand you're sailing around and I'm sure it was beautiful, but after a little bit, you're a little bit struggling for, I need a little activity but why in the world would you go, I think I could make up a whole conversations and scenarios and describe people's feelings. And that's just, I don't know where that comes from.
So the drive came way earlier. In the 90s, I was living in Germany and I was reading a book by Mary Higgins Clark. And I had a business trip the next morning where a car was picking me up at 4 a.m. And so I thought, I'll read a little bit before I go to bed. And I could not put it down. And I knew I should go to bed. It was dumb to stay up. I knew I had a big travel day and a meeting at the end of the day and all of that stuff. But I could not stop reading it. I just had to read it. So I was exhausted. And when I was sitting in the car the next morning, I thought, I want to write something that does that to somebody else, where instead of being all stressed out about this presentation I had to do and stuff, okay, I didn't sleep, but I did something fun instead of being stressed. And I thought, I just want to do that. And I didn't know how hard it is. I had no idea. I thought, I can write a book.
Mm-hmm.
Just had no idea. And maybe going in, I don't know, I probably still would have done it, but I just thought it was a great fun activity to keep my brain busy and work on something that was real.
So, growing up, I read all the Hardy Boy mystery books,
Mm-hmm.
and the Call of the Wild, the Jack London books. I just love those books. I would sit and read them the whole book on a Saturday and a
Mm-hmm.
Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
as a kid. So I really relate getting caught up in those
Yeah.
stories and just keep turning and turning. It's really neat to see life or think about things from someone else's perspectives
Yeah.
that you would have never experienced in
Mm-hmm.
your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all right, you sit down, you start writing a book, and so the folks that listen to this podcast, they're business leaders, they're
Mm-hmm.
business owners, entrepreneurs, marketing directors, StoryBrand guides, and students. But to sit down and think, I'm going to write a book, there's a big hurdle that you got to get past to really like give yourself permission or to actually see yourself as someone that writes a book, when much less reading a book seems like a big hurdle for a lot of people. Where did you start to, you ran into your first obstacle. You ran into your first resistance as Stephen, he writes the War of Art,
Yeah.
Pressfield. Anyway, he
Yes.
talks about resistance, but where did you start to get past the resistance?
So I'm very lucky. I'm married to a man who's totally supportive
Mm-hmm.
and is a yes person. And so, for his attitude was just go for it. Yeah, it's hard, but just, sit down and do it. Just do it. So, for me, the resistance came, the first part's so exciting. You just kind of, oh, am I just going to do this, right? I had no idea what I was going to write. I had this idea. There was a woman on a bus going to a ski resort. That was my idea. So I just started writing. Okay. And the thing that happened to me really early on is what we talked about a little bit the other day is that I wrote a scene and it existed.
Mm-hmm.
It existed. It wasn't there in the morning and it was there at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And for some reason, that totally motivates me. And every time I sit down and think, oh, I'm too tired to write. I don't have any imagination today, whatever. I think about that rush of a feeling, even if it's a terrible scene, I still wrote it. It's still there. And it kind of kept me going. And I was also in a luxurious position where I had time in my life at that time to really focus on it. And so it's not as intimidating if you're working 12 hours a day and you're taking care of your kids and you're trying to do all these things and then fit it in somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I had the not only time, but the mental space to do it.
Wow. So I've published a book as well, as you're aware of, and
Yeah.
I'm telling you, when I saw the first draft of it, it was a real rough draft. It was
Mm-hmm.
rough on me to read it, and
Yeah.
I went into a shell for a while before I could come back out, read it again, and then approach it and start to address that. Did you experience those, or are you just a natural?
No, I'm not a natural. I have to work really hard at it. But what helped me is I had some really great mentors. Joan Barfoot, who is a famous Canadian author, she was one of my mentors. And also Gary Ryan, who at one point was the president of Crime Writers of Canada. And so he's a well-known Canadian author. And I had them, I hooked up through various connections. And so they were very helpful in pointing out to me, you need to work on this, but this is great. So keep going. You've got something. And so I had outside professional encouragement,
Mm-hmm.
which helps a lot, right? To keep you going. Because when you read your own stuff, and still when you read, you think, oh, anytime I do a reading and stuff, you think, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because your mind does, oh, I could have written that better. Oh, I could have done that better. And you think, well, it's published. You have to just move on. You can't do anything. Just move on. But you still, I think, always as a writer have that doubt. And I read something by Ken Foley who talked about his first books, which I think are fantastic. And he went, oh, I can't believe those are out. They're terrible. And you think, no, I love those books, right? So I think that doubt never goes away.
Yeah. So how was your first book received? How long did it take you to get it done? And then how was it received? How did it go over?
So I was really lucky. Okay, so it took me, I started writing it in 2009, and then I wrote my second book, and then I wrote my third book. And then I got an agent, and she said, your third book is really your first book. So I rewrote it. I switched the whole series, and I had to do first book, second book, third book, and carry everything through. And then my agent retired right when I got a publisher. So then I went with a publisher. So because I had 3 books, they had a staged process to put all 3 out. And the first week that I was put up on Amazon, I hit #1 on Amazon's hot new releases. So I just had tremendous luck on timing, I think, of putting it out and who it went out with and that kind of stuff. And all through the time I was writing, I worked hard on my connections in the industry, on getting real advice from people and listening to that advice about what I needed to do with my story. So it's my story and my art, of course, but when you have professionals out there helping you, you just make it that much better. And so I took it every piece of advice I got, I took really seriously and paid attention to it. And, you treat it like it's a business, that if I want people to pay money for this, it should be a high quality product.
So what was the name of the first book in that series of three?
So the first time around, you mean, or
Mm-hmm.
so
And
the,
this,
okay. So right now it's Descent is the first one, Blaze, and Avalanche. But when I first wrote it, it was Avalanche, Descent, Blaze. And so Avalanche went to the end. Descent came from number 2 to number 1, and Blaze came from number 3 to number 2. Yeah.
so I'm looking on Amazon, right? And Blaze is over there, paperback version. Something must be really special. It's priced at $343.68.
No. So you know what that is? The
What
first
is
time that
that?
happened to me, I thought, I called my publisher and went, something's wrong. Somebody has a used version and they put it up. It's not me. It's got nothing to do with me. And you see it all over the place with books on Amazon, that they have some outrageous price on them. And there's some funky thing going, and these used copies available here and here. And, this is completely out of my control. So I actually ignore all of that.
That's
I don't look
crazy.
at it.
I didn't know that.
No. And when people steal it and then offer me a stolen copy, I ignore that too. I say, okay, no, thank you. I'm actually the author, but thank you very much for that stolen copy.
So time goes on and you figure out, something happens where you go, I need to set up a software to make this process
Yes.
more effective.
Yeah.
Tell us about that inciting incident.
So that I remember exactly the moment that happened. So so my husband and I have been married 30 years, and we've worked all over the world. And so we've worked in small expat communities, in offices where we could look at each other, like see each other, have lunch together, whatever. So we're very used to working together. So and then we lived on a sailboat together. So I'll caveat it with that. And we were just getting off. We'd been on our sailboat for 5 years, and we were just coming off and trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do next? And I was actually writing. I was sitting at my computer and I was writing, and he walked by and he looked at the computer and he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, well, I'm trying to, keep track of this and that and, my story elements. He's like, but you're in Excel. I thought you were writing. So, well, I am writing, but I need all these, I had this massive spreadsheet with 86 columns and a whole bunch of sheets and linking this and linking that. And when is this character coming in and when are they leaving and who knows what? But that's how I did it. And at the time, of course, I was on a sailboat, so I didn't have room for a whiteboard or a dining room table or anything. I had my little MacBook.
Mm-hmm.
I had everything in my little space. And he went, well, surely there's just a better way. And he went and looked for a piece of software that could do it for me. And he went, well, there isn't one. So that night at dinner, we sat around and he went, when we go back, we don't really want to work for anybody else now. So why don't we just build this and sell it and we'll start our company? And I said, okay, let's do that. And so we just went forward.
So tell us what this software does. It's called Fictionary.
Mm-hmm.
Help me envision it, because
Okay.
I haven't used it.
Okay, so it's for writers who basically have a first draft. You can write from scratch in it if you want, but there's a ton of writing software out there and a lot of great writing software. So that's not really our thing. Our thing is all about doing an edit on the story. So not the words, it's nothing to do with grammar, nothing to do with punctuation or spelling. It's about the story. And so what happens, kind of a thing of beauty, in my own biased opinion. So you import a manuscript, so 50,000 words, 150,000 words, whatever, it doesn't matter. So the manuscript gets imported and the software scans it. And so it pulls out the word count per scene, it pulls out all of the characters, and then it draws a story arc. So the first thing a writer will see is, based on their book, a recommended story arc for a commercially successful book. Versus what their story arc is. And they can start working on it like, oh, my inciting incident happens at 40% in.
Mhm.
That's a problem that needs to bump up or go sooner in the book, that kind of thing. They can use the word count per scene to figure out pacing in their story. They can see their characters all in one place, and they can see them linked to scenes, and they can see when characters come in, how often they're in, who's got the point of view, what the order of the point of view is. So it's a very visual way. And then the hard work starts. So then we have all of our elements. And the story elements are based on characters, plot, and settings. And within those, then, for example, you'd have, so what's your point of view character's goal? What's their internal goal? What happens if they fail? All of these things. And similar things for plot and setting. And so it encourages the writer to then, okay, so I've had a look at my overall structure visually, can see where I have issues, and then they can look at the flow of how they're starting each scene and ending each scene, and do they have hooks, and are they varying the types, and all of that. And so it gives the writer a structured way of being creative. So it's not dictating, it's giving guidelines of, here are things to consider if you're having trouble. And these are the places you look at. And as they edit, move scenes around, and add text and whatever, the story arc redraws every time, so they can see it change and what it looks like. They can see, geez, I've got 27 point of view characters. Well, okay, you should have 5 to 7, so that's a problem, right? Stuff like that to go, you finish writing your draft, you got your big blob of 80,000 words, and either printed or, sitting in MS Word or whatever, and you go, no, okay, great. You can't see it yourself. But if you have a structured way to go, how did I enter every scene? And you can see it together, you go, oh, wait a minute. I start every scene in a doorway. That's a problem, right? Which
Yeah.
I use that example because my first draft of my first book, I did that. And my husband went, do you know that you do this? I'm like, I do not. And of course I do. So then you think, okay, I have to keep track of these things. So, and then inside of Fictionary, with each of the elements, there's also writing advice. So why is it important, and how do you use it, and what are you looking for when you're trying to fix it? And so instead of having to go look it up on the internet or like pick up a book on writing, you can look right there. And so we've collected years and years of writing advice for each of these and put it all in one place, so that, if a writer's just working on the characters, all that writing advice is there for them, and they don't have to go looking for it. It's right hand in hand. That's kind of the scoop.
I wrote a nonfiction book, which is nowhere near as complicated as a fiction, but I struggled to keep things straight in my head at first. It took a while until I really was like going through it, maybe like the 8th time, then I started to know what was around that corner, so to speak. That was really hard for me to get it clear. And I laid it out on a table, and I did it different ways, and I just couldn't get, and then I have to clean it up every time, and then restart again. So you and your husband helps you get the software together. So what was the first book that you applied that system to?
Then so on our beta product, I was writing Look the Other Way, which is my 4th novel. It's a standalone novel that, funny enough, it's a murder mystery that takes place on a sailboat in the Bahamas. So
is that where you were sailing with your husband?
Yeah. So we left there, and then I wrote a book about it, which seems to be what I do. I have to leave somewhere to write a book about it. But that's the first one. And at the time, I was also working with my publisher's editor. So we used the beta of really rough version of that for Look the Other Way. So that was pretty exciting to do. And then my current work in progress, Evolution, I've just run through, but having editors edit it. And I've had 13 different editors edit it, because I want to prove out, by using a system like this, it can improve the quality of an editor's work, because they have to be thorough and comprehensive, and they can't skip. So they can't have kind of preferences that they're really good at character but not setting, for example. So I've just gotten all the feedback from 13 different editors on the same book. So that's a very interesting experience.
So I was wondering, is like, okay, you had this beta version. How was it received by these people that hadn't ever, they're used to running on their natural instinct. And here's this author that thinks she's the big
Yeah.
deal, and she brings her software. How did that go?
So what we did there, we spent almost a year testing it with writers.
Mm-hmm.
So we worked with writers all over the world, and got them to try it and got their feedback, and then just kept working. So we took about a year to do that. And then when that year was up, then we put out our first version, and we let that sit for 6 months. So we just, we sold it, but we didn't make any changes to the software. All we did was collect feedback from people. And it's amazing how generous people are on being willing to provide you honest feedback. And it helps tremendously when you're trying to make a product for writers. If you have hundreds and hundreds of writers using it and telling you, I like this, I don't like this, I don't understand this, that's really clear, et cetera, et cetera. So we spent 6 months just evaluating our first issue of the product, whatever you want to call it. And then we spent another 7 or 8 months making all the updates that we needed to make based on all of that feedback. And so then we started, once we put that version out, we started to really roll. And we continue the thing that's really important. So we have a live chat. And so we talk to writers every day to see what's going on. Are they having trouble? Do they not understand something? Do they need, they're not quite understanding point of view. And so they do, then we can add that stuff right into the app of, okay, people keep asking this question about their characters.
Mm-hmm.
So we just throw it in. And so we're really, really active with working with our customers to make sure that we continue just to add things that are helpful as opposed to what I would personally like, because that's how I write.
So your book, your first 3 come out and they do great. There's a bit of pressure there. Can you do it again? Can you do it again? So you run your 4th book through your software.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did it perform after?
It's my best book.
Yes.
So, but to be fair, I'd already written 3 books. It was the 4th book I wrote, so it should be better anyway.
You'd think, but some people don't. Some people stumble.
Yeah. So, it's my best book. So,
but when you say your best book, is that you feel best about it, or it really sold the best?
Both. Yeah. So, I've made more money off of that one than the first ones. Descent did well financially because I sold it to a publisher in Germany. And it was translated into German and sold there. So that's a little nice extra piece of income there. So out of the Stone Mountain ones, it's done the best, but out of all 4, Look the Other Way, it's done the best. And then we'll have to see what I'm going to do with Evolution, my one that I've had all this editor input in on how I'm going to do that one, right? That's the next big. So we'll see.
So what version is yours? If you had version 1, version 2, what version are you now on Fictionary?
I would say about 4.
4.
But it's a hard question to answer because we update continually and make changes. So I'm going to say we've made kind of 4 big changes.
In how many years?
To it. So we launched it in 2018, so 2 years. Okay. So every 6 months-ish, right? You do the bigger thing, and every 2 weeks we do a little thing.
That's life. So, all right, 38, you call them Fictionary Story Elements.
Yeah.
Right. Now, in the world of story, are there 38 elements, or are those 38 that you identified? Because I've got different books on story, whatever. Yep.
So it's it's the ones I feel are most important. And, there was we added a few just because of writer input and stuff. But basically I spent 8 years researching it, read, I think it's like 120 different books on writing and editing. And when I mean read, I read it. I took a postgraduate course at Humber School for Writers.
Mm-hmm.
And then I took another structural editing at Simon Fraser University. So I just worked really hard at researching, taking everybody's opinion out there and figuring out, okay, what do I think? And we put it into Fictionary.
So are they categories like, like the 4 in one category of elements, or?
Yep, it's broken to characters, plot, and setting.
Okay.
It fits into those 3. Yeah.
Okay, characters, plot, settings. So, we're what's called a StoryBrand certified agency. And we were the first, or the original agency. And the reason that we were drawn to it is because Donald Miller wrote the book Building a Story Brand, but he had broken down like a 7-part framework, like this real simple, easy framework that we could all follow together, and it would help us make really clear, succinct messaging for our clients, materials, websites, etc. What, when you think about those 38 elements, which of those, what are like top 5 elements that you have to just really be the best at if you're going to not be the best at some of the others?
So the first thing a writer, so we'll look at character first. You need to know who has the point of view for the scene. Even if you're writing from first person single point of view, you need to have that in your head always, that is the perspective you're telling the story from, because you're making a promise to the reader that you're seeing it through those eyes.
Okay.
Right.
So if I'm not, that means we're in their brain looking at their perspective.
Right. And so a very easy point of view thing is, if it's Kristina heard the dog bark, that's filtering it, right? That's where if it's the dog barked and I'm the point of view character, I heard it because the dog barked and I'm the point of view character. But you can't do things like a street over, a dog barked. Well, I can't hear that. So as the point of view character, you can't put it in the scene because I can't possibly know that. And then you have writer or reader distrust that you think, well, unless it's I have some psychic powers or something, right? But normal world stuff that I can't see, feel, touch, hear, whatever, can't be in the scene, just not in the scene. And so it's very tempting to put in little thoughts and these and stuff, but then it becomes episodic and you don't believe what the writer's doing because you don't feel it. And you also feel distance from the character. Like you really want the reader to feel like they're seeing it through the character. So if I'm afraid, you're afraid, right? But it's so intense that's really what you're trying to drive for.
That's really cool, because in that StoryBrand framework, the reason marketing is broken is because all brands present themselves as the hero, but their consumers or customers or whatever, they need to be the hero. They need to see it from their point of view, and you're nailing it.
Yeah. So there's that. And then also on character is, what's the point of view's character's goal? And there's 2 biggies. One is that like the overarching goal for the story, but there's also every scene, the point of view character has to have a goal or they're not doing anything. And it has to be a goal of consequence. So if my goal is to have a sip of water and I don't get it, nothing happens. Does anybody care? Nope. But if my goal is to have a sip of water and there's poison in that water, okay, now it becomes a little bit more interesting. So it has to be something related to the story. It can't be a goal of, I have a mortgage and I have to pay it, but it's really a murder mystery. And if it has nothing to do with it, nobody cares. So related to the story, it has to have consequences so that the reader is worried that if they don't get it, or if they do get it, something bad is going to happen, and there's suspense in the story. So without a goal, every single scene, you're not keeping the reader.
So does that impact their insecurities too? The internal things that they're trying to resolve, even though they're thirsty, there's something internal that's residing with that.
That's right. And so you have to also have that internal goal, which typically relates to the flaw whatever the character's flaw
Mm-hmm.
is. All characters have a flaw, and it has to relate to that. And you don't want to solve that too quickly, right? The character might not even know they have the goal to solve that. It might be it's their need that has to happen for them to have a good life or whatever it is. And somewhere along the line, they're going to discover that, I'm way too much of an introvert, and it's actually causing problems in my life, and I'm going to have to deal with this and get up there and face it somehow. And then through the story, that's the character arc that changes. It's mostly related to the internal, which then makes readers care and cheer for that character.
So at some point, they're going to meet this other character, or they're going to find this recipe or something that gives them some enlightenment, or gives them some direction, or
right.
What is that element called in your?
So that element, that's really around the midpoint of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where the character starts going from reactive to proactive. So there's an event that has happened at the story. And so that's the midpoint. And up until then, the character is still kind of reacting to things. And at the midpoint, they got to start being proactive. And it's that moment in there. And that's sort of between 40 and 60% in the story. It sits in that point.
So that's before they would get into the pit where they started being proactive, but they're going to fail.
That's right. And everything they do makes it worse and worse and worse and worse until you get to the climax. And then, of course, they either win or they lose. Mm-hmm. So
I watched these series. Like on Netflix, you'll have season 1 and season 2. Let's talk Ozark, whatever.
Right.
And so there's multiple story arcs going on over time, is there not? I mean, we're learning about internal struggles on 4 or 5 characters all through the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's a very experienced writer, and it's talented. And so what we recommend is when you're first writing, don't try something that hard, right? Because you have to know that's a multi-point of view story, and you have to know all of your subplots, and it's hard to do skillfully. I mean, Game of Thrones is a prime example of that, where obviously very popular, did it well, but there's point of views all over the place. That, if you're a novice writer, you start with really no more than 5 to 7. You can control that, but it takes significant talent to get character depth for that many points of view. And I love the Game of Thrones ones, because some of those people, you really don't want them to succeed, right? They're just terrible. And so you just really feel like, come on, fall off the cliff, right?
Yes.
And the other ones, you're like, run, right? It gets you going. And even though they flip point of view, they start at the right moment. You know what that character wants. You know what the consequences are if they don't get it. Or if they do get it, those consequences are horrible for a character you care about. And so you're fully physically engaged in the story because it's so well done.
I think what they did really well was they killed Ned right early. And it's like, wait a minute, we've just got invested. We're buying into his,
right.
And then all of a sudden he's dead. And then they did it again, at least this unexpected. And I'm going, this is unusual. It's different. It hasn't been this way in a lot of stories.
So that's a really important point, is when you have a significant event occur, that's going to set the scene for how your story is going to be. It has to be early in the story. So that, to make it super easy. So if you're writing a funny book, you need to have humor in the opening scene. If you're writing multiple points of view, you need to change them quickly. You can't write 3/4 of a book and then change the point of view because your reader goes, what? So by killing Ned right away, it set you up for all bets are off. You have no idea what's going to happen. You think you can guess, but you just don't know. And so it keeps you on the edge of suspense because they did it so early. They made you get invested in that character, and you liked him and you wanted him to succeed, and you never thought his head was going to roll. And then they did it, and now you're set for the rest of the series. that the unexpected will happen. And so you're completely caught up. It was super smart.
Totally. So of those 38 story elements, which one was like an epiphany for you that
Okay.
it revealed itself and you weren't expecting it?
Yeah, so that one is the emotional impact of setting.
Okay.
And
Give us the backstory on
okay,
that.
so I'll tell you that. So I read a Ken Foley book called Whiteout,
Mm-hmm.
and I loved it, and I read every word. And I'm a skimmer of description. That's how I read. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, that's a nice tree, I don't
I
care.
can't keep up with all the descriptions.
I don't care. I read his book and I read every word, and I thought, okay, that's unusual for me. Why did I read every word? And I literally went back through his book, and every time he describes a location,
Mm-hmm.
it's relevant to the story and the emotional impact to either the reader or the character in that scene. And it's completely linked. He never describes anything that isn't important. And so if he had a character in a dark parking lot outside of a building at night, and he wants that character to be afraid, the emotional impact is there because he's put that character out there alone, right? And so everywhere he had the characters, there was an emotional impact of either it's safe because you're giving the reader a break and they need a breather because it's been going do, right? Or, okay, now it's getting scary, and it's brilliantly done. And I realized that is the emotional impact of every scene. And so now when I write, after I have my first draft, I go back and I look at that and go, does it need to be in this location? Or could I put it somewhere even better to make it more exciting for the reader? Or does it need to be a quieter, loving scene and I should tone it down a little bit? And so now I think really hard, maybe not when I'm writing my first draft because you just want to write it, but after I have a first draft, I think really hard about what's the emotion this particular location is having.
So I watch or I read and I notice that in the middle of it, I'm going, what's that guy's name? I'm having struggling to keep names.
Mm-hmm.
Is it because of me that I'm just not paying attention, or is
Mm-hmm.
there something wrong with they could have tweaked?
There is definitely something wrong, and I'll see if I can remember their names now. The Tom Cruise movie that came out, which I'm going to forget the name, but a recent one where he like hangs off a helicopter off a cliff.
Yeah.
There's two villains in it,
Mm-hmm.
and they have it's Jim and John. It's not actually names, but it's something like that. The names are so close. And when the other characters are referring to them, you think, which one was it? Wait, was that him or him? Because the names started with the same letter.
Mm-hmm.
So what Fictionary does, it shows you all of your names together. And you can see a book comes in and you think, oh my God, there's 10 characters whose name starts with A-L, right? Or every name is two syllables. And your brain can't remember. Like you very quickly, Karen, Caitlin, you're not going to remember. And so Fictionary shows you, look at all of these and how similar they are. And even when you look at, if you have a first name of Ben and somebody else's last name is Benson, and the worst case scenario is somebody dies and you think, was that Ben or Ben? Which one was that?
Mm-hmm.
And then you think, I don't want to read this. It's annoying. So character names are really important. And if you've gotten lost on the character names, that's the writer's fault, not the reader, that the names are just too similar.
I feel better now. Okay.
Yes, you should feel good. It's okay.
So where do you see, what are some brands that you really admire that actually you can tell that they really kind of are clued in either naturally or deliberately in presenting their messaging good in a story way?
Nike is a strong one. They have lots of good story. That is actually, there are some ads where there's story, but it doesn't relate to the product. You can't remember what the product is.
Yeah.
That, Nike has a long history of super great ads that you totally relate it to your, now I run, so of course I pay a little bit of attention to it, but there's that. What else is jumping out? Of course, now I can't think of anything besides Nike. I don't know. I can't think of anything
That's
else.
okay. That's okay. That was totally unsuspected. I came at you from out of the closet. You didn't expect it.
As soon as we hang up, I'm going to go, oh, I know.
So like, what's that game where it's like Mr. Mustard with the candlestick?
Right. Oh,
Clue.
yes, Clue.
So is that a good training exercise on thinking about story, or is that just, we're drawn to it for some reason, right?
And sorry, is what a good
Clue. Is it Clue? Is
Oh.
this Clue kind of like a little exercise in thinking about story, or is it?
Sure.
Yeah.
I've actually played that game a lot with my nieces and nephews. That, yeah, and it is good in the sense that it gives you different. It's always changing, so it makes you think of, and what you should do as a writer is you should think, well, what if I did this or that or this or that or this or that, and it's a continually different thing, right? As opposed to just what first comes into your head and you write it out and you think you're done.
So when you go do your readings, or you're talking to people, or maybe getting interviewed, do you find yourself kind of like building a little, not a fictional story, but you're taking some events and making it flow better, and just because that's your natural instinct?
Sometimes, or if I know I'm talking to someone who knows story, I just let them guide it because it's their show, and they have a story thing in mind they want to do. If I'm driving it, then yes, I do that every time I think about what is my story and how am I starting and how am I ending. But it's very dependent on who I'm talking to and what the scenario is.
So you let them drive it.
Yeah.
Explain that more to me, obviously, but instead of me assuming, though, let's play like I'm really dim. Well, maybe, but.
So, for example, with you, right? You're about story. So we had a little chat ahead of time. I think, okay, yeah, you know what you're doing. That's great. I just let it go, and we have a nice discussion around it. And I totally trust that you're just going to do the right thing with this, right? If I had the impression I wasn't sure it was going to go that way, then I would even go to the point of I would write up a suggested flow of let's talk about these. Here's the questions. Let's follow it this way. And so I try and assess on the other side what they're about, and how story knowledgeable are they, and do they apply story to their business or not? And if the answer is yes, then great. It's just a nice conversation. And if the answer is no, then I'm a little bit more forceful of, I want it to go this way.
So, all right. So in the hero's journey, right, the circle, after they kind of come through the pit and they get they're coming back with the gold. So Fictionary was your gold that you brought back to your community from your journey that you went through. But the thing about that circle is the journey starts to go again, right? You're not finished.
No.
So what's your next inciting incident, and what's your next journey that you're on?
So the next journey is we've developed a product called Story Coach, which is for editors to perform structural edits on somebody else's book. And my goal, my personal dream is I think there's a lot of writers out there, if they don't understand the editing process, they can get the wrong editor. And the editor may think they know what they're doing, but they don't. And that's not great for the writer. And so my dream is to provide a platform and training to editors so that they can just provide the best quality. If you're going to pay your $3,000 to $5,000 for a structural edit, the editor should really be providing something special. And so we've hit the inciting incident in that there's a company called First Editing, and they have all they have is they edit fiction and nonfiction, but they have become the very first Fictionary certified story coach company. So we trained all of their editors on using Story Coach, and they have to be at a certain level. So they had to be tested to make sure that they're at that level. And so they are now certified to perform story edits using Story Coach, so that a writer knows when you have an edit done that way, you get certain deliverables, and it's really clear what they are, what you get for your money. And I started that because I do a little bit of editing on the side, really just to keep up my editing skills so that we're doing a product that's helping with editing. I want to make sure I'm always good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I started editing people's books who said, well, I've already had a story edit, but I still think it needs work. Can you do it? And so I go, sure. And then I would see what their original edit would be, and it would be a copy edit. I think you didn't get a story edit, and that's why you're not happy with your story. And so that started in my mind, there needs to be a way for writers to see, I should be getting this in a story edit. And there needs to be a way for editors to know, I should be delivering this in a story edit, so that, editors can have a more successful business because they do a better job, but writers then get a true story structural edit and not just a copy edit.
Yeah. I wasn't aware that there were so many different types of edits.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That was a learning thing for me. But in the back of my mind, I had a feeling about what my story was supposed to do. And then I need to trust my editor to some extent, right?
Right.
And I kept wavering on, am I being stubborn?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I natural at this? And then do I trust that? That's a great idea.
Well, and the thing is, what a writer has to remember is an editor is one person.
Mm-hmm.
It's their perspective of what a good story is. But if you have an editor using a piece of software that forces them, they have to be accountable to all of the different elements and either tell you, awesome, it's okay, or this needs work, but here's why, and here's the writing advice to go with it of why you need to change this, or why you should think about changing it, right? Because you never really say you need to change it, but it's a suggestion of us, I'm writing this, I would change these things, and these are the reasons. And the writer, when they get that edit, they get the original story arc and word count per scene and all of these things they can see. And then they take their editor comments, they revise their manuscript, and those all update. And they can see the original one and the final one. And they can see, wow, okay, now I have a story arc that should be fitting what's commercially successful right now, versus I had this crazy story arc that I didn't know how to fix. And the editor's comments should help them be able to do that. And they should be able to see, oh, okay, here's my improvements.
I do want to say I was fortunate. I had a really good editor. The thing that's striking about this to me is the reason that the software works so well, it's not on this just your feelings of what a great story should be. It's what our brains crave, that it follows and honors these rules. And so what you've created is a software that helps you follow a framework.
Yep.
And then you don't know why, but I just liked it. It connected.
Yeah.
I was worried. I had anxiety reading that scene. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So, the brain does like a story a certain way, and it hasn't changed in the history of people. So, and there's a ton of scientific research out there supporting it, right? So we've been through all of that on what that is and how it impacts the brain. But the real critical thing is, yes, everybody likes a certain format of story, but there's millions and millions and millions and millions of different stories that fit into that. So it's all different and all creative, and the voice is different. And so it's still providing a unique experience for the reader, because there's only one you. And that's how you write your story. All this is doing is help you write it better, but it's still your story.
Totally. So let's tell me two of your favorite books.
Favorite books. Yikes. That's always a hard one. Because my favorites are usually what I'm reading now. This is going to sound really funny, but Twilight, which is not a genre I read,
right,
at all, but I read it because I wanted to study it in the context of Fictionary, and I loved it. Silly. I read it for a totally work-related reason and couldn't put it down, and then had to go back and review it and evaluate it. That you think, wow, that one caught me off guard. I mean, I can't really narrow down, because I read Oh, I mean, I read a book a week. I'm always reading. That mostly mystery, and I like not too violent. I like there's a crime, and okay, there's a dead body over there, and then it's the story and the who did it kind of thing. I love that. I don't like gore. I do like thrillers, but it depends on how violent they are. And for me, it's like I'll just skim the violence. Like, oh, that's the villain. I don't want to read his scene. I'll just skip the whole scene and go to the next one. So I kind of take what I like out of stories. It's funny you mentioned The Call of the Wild, though, because that was one of my favorite childhood books.
Mm-hmm.
And when the movie came out, I thought, you got to be kidding me. That's the book I love. That stuck with me from childhood would be that. I have to say, Moonlight Becomes You from Mary Higgins Clark, because that's the one that triggered me that I want to write a book. So it sticks with me. Once in a while, I go back and read it just to see, what did I like so much about this book? Like, what was it? And it's a very simple mystery. It's almost a cozy mystery, but I loved it. So that one kind of sticks with me. Yeah, I don't know. That's about it.
This has been a great conversation. And you've been a great guest too.
Thank you.
What question does nobody ever ask you that you wish they would?
Yeah. For junior writers,
Mm-hmm.
I would like them to ask more, what's a scene? It's so critical to a powerful story, and nobody thinks about it. And so we've actually started putting material together about that, because nobody ever asked me, what's a scene in a novel? And
so is it like the foundation, or just the fundamental box that everything has to go in?
It is. And if you don't get that right and understand what a scene is, you're not going to have a great story.
So now, to be fair to everyone that's listening, she hasn't read my book, so it wasn't included in one of maybe her favorite books.
I know.
But
and it's also nonfiction. I was just totally assuming fiction.
But my book's about that very thing, not the scene necessarily, but everyone assumes that every business has their act together as far as the fundamentals on their platform, that they're building this virtual business promotion,
right?
But they don't. And it's like everyone's looking for a silver bullet or the sexy chatbots or whatever, but they don't get the fundamentals. That's what my book's about.
Okay, fantastic. Which, of course, is really hard to get to as a business, right? Mm-hmm. That we talked about that for 6 months. It's really a hard question to answer, because you think it's obvious. I have this piece of software and it does this. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not really the answer, is it? Mm-hmm. So it's tough, and you have to spend a lot of brain power, and you have to talk to people outside of your circle and bounce it off them, and again and again and again and again, until you figure out what it is.
Yeah. And so I'm just thinking here, if you were to write a paragraph about what your software does, you'd start with your hero and what they're wanting to do. And then what's their external struggle? They're wanting to write a good book, but all the internal stuff, and that's what your software is resolving, those internal things.
That's right.
Because you're listing out what success is going to look like, but the failures and the balance here.
That's right. Yes.
And you're going to make a transformation as a writer and or an editor.
It's funny you say that, because I actually wrote a blog from the writer's perspective of what your journey is from the inciting incident to the climax when you're writing your novel, just to run the whole thing through what it felt like for me when I was doing it, just to itemize that out. But yeah.
Kristina, I really enjoyed this. This was fun. If people want to connect with you, how do they find you? How do they get to chat with you on your software?
Well, I'm in my website, obviously, is fictionary.co. And I'm on Twitter at The Story Editor, but I don't answer messages there. So don't do that. I'm Kristina Stanley on LinkedIn. I do look at those. We have a Facebook page called The Story Editor, and I answer messages from there. If you sign up for our software for the trial, I always chat with people every day. So I do a lot of chat there. And then our email address off the website is helpful.editor@fictionary.co. And there I will see stuff that if people want to talk to me directly, I will actually see those. So those are the, the best ways to get to me.
Awesome. And as everybody has witnessed, it's a great conversation for sure. Kristina, thank you so much for being on the ROI Online Podcast.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.